Joining me now to parse what all of that means, our team of NBC News reporters. White House correspondent Monica Alba is with us. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley is in Tel Aviv. And NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube is at the Pentagon. Mon, I'll start with you. What more are we learning about why the president left that G7 early and what happened in this Situation Room meeting this afternoon?
Well, Garrett, like with anything with this president, a couple of things can be true at once, and it does seem like he did decide to come back to Washington, at least for the official explanation, to monitor the situation that's unfolding in the Middle East and to be able to have some face-to-face conversations with his top aides and advisors in order to make a series of key decisions. At the same time, he says that he felt he had a very successful day of meetings yesterday in Canada and that he had accomplished everything he had set out to. So sometimes we have seen a pattern of the president leave these global summits early once he feels he wants to. He makes that decision and then he acts on it. As far as that meeting that he had in the Situation Room, we know it lasted a little over an hour. And if it's anything like it was on Friday, where a lot of this was unfolding in real time, these are conversations where the president is likely reviewing a menu of options about what role the U.S. can play here beyond what it's already doing in terms of aiding Israel in its defense, trying to intercept and fight off those missiles and drones coming from Iran. But the major question here that nobody has been able to answer is whether the U.S. is going to be really plunged further into this conflict by, for instance, potentially assassinating the supreme leader of Iran, which the president says for now he will not do, even though he says the U.S. knows where he's hiding. Will the U.S. provide some weaponry that would aid Israel, or that the U.S. would unilaterally act to try to further cripple Iran's nuclear capabilities and ability to enrich uranium, which we know is something that is possibly being considered? Or is a lot of this political bluster and threat, which, again, and you detailed this in his Truth Social post, is pretty aggressive language for something that the president could be, again, preparing the American people to consider? Or is this just a conversation he's trying to force to see if there's any kind of diplomatic path that can be returned to, though that seems pretty difficult at this point?
Mon, you're as experienced as anyone of trying to parse these things. To expand on your metaphor of the menu of options here, what does the president's social media post, what do the comments from the vice president tell you about what the president might choose here?
It does seem like he is trying to at least put the narrative out there or set the stage for the idea that the U.S. could join Israel or try to act on this and go forth with some potential military action in Iran. Just look at the language he's using. He's saying, we have total control of the skies over Iran. Our patience is wearing thin. He's trying to imply that this is now an argument that the U.S. is at the table at and more involved in. And not just, again, in that diplomatic sense, which is what the argument had been for the last couple of weeks, saying that the president, even on Air Force One a few hours ago, he said, I'd love for everybody to get back to the table and to try to take the deal. But he's really tilting in the other direction, it seems. And you mentioned the vice president's comments as well. He is the one saying that the president needs to be trusted on this. But again, they're trying to kind of pull back and say that there's an idea here that could be way more broad than what had originally been discussed when the posture had been the U.S. was just going to be helping and in a defensive posture and not going forward and being more involved. But they're now opening the door to that in a far more significant manner, I'd say. Garrett.
All right, Monica, keep us posted on if we start to hear anything more from the White House now that meeting has wrapped up. I want to turn now to Matt Bradley in Tel Aviv. Matt, I know you spent big portions of last night in a shelter. What's the mood like in Tel Aviv today? What's the view on the ground there?
Yeah, well, Garrett, and I got to tell you, it wasn't big portions of the night. It was maybe 20 or 30 minutes for 3 times throughout the entire night. Once early in the night, once 3 a.m., and then once, 7 or 8 a.m. But I got to tell you, when you walk around the streets here in Tel Aviv, I think the best thing I can do to compare it for you is it's like COVID. Once bustling city streets, now almost entirely quiet. You see someone here and there. Every once in a while you'll see a shop open, but really very, very quiet compared to what it was before. That having been said, we have now seen, as I mentioned, the quietest period that we've had ever since this whole thing began on Friday morning. We haven't had a fatality in Israel from Iranian attacks in the past 24 hours. So that is new, and whether or not that actually indicates that Iran is running out of steam, that its weapons are no longer coming to bear in the same way they were in the opening days. I can't make that judgment, and we don't really know, though we are hearing from the Israelis time and time again, I think as you mentioned, that the Israelis enjoy complete air superiority over Tehran, Iran's capital, and that they've managed to knock out about a third of Iran's missile launchers, which means they're going to be sending over, presumably, fewer missiles, and that's exactly what we're hearing from the IDF, that each volley that has been fired in the past day, more or less, is a fraction of, or contains a fraction of the number of missiles that the volleys contained before in the opening days, and even fewer than they contained back last year in April and October, the last time the Israelis and the Iranians exchanged direct fire. So, again, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but things have dramatically quieted down, even though there still seems to be a lot of pain that the Iranians are capable of meting out.
All right, Matt, stay safe over there. I want to turn to Courtney now. And Courtney, I want to pick up on this acknowledgement from Director Gabbard. I guess acknowledgement's not the right word, but her comments today that she's now on the same page as the president when it comes to the assessment of Iran's nuclear program. Do we believe that's because the assessment has been changed to get her on the president's page, or perhaps the president is overstating where the nuclear program is for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's
Where
a great
are they
question,
really?
Garrett.
I guess maybe the better way to start.
That's a great question. So publicly, what we know about the Director of National Intelligence, well, the intelligence community's assessment is that Iran is not currently making a nuclear weapon. Now, we know that they have pretty dramatically increased their stockpile of enriched uranium, and that is putting them on a glide path towards having the ability to build the weapon. But the key here is the intelligence agencies continue to say, and frankly have said this for years, that that decision has not been made by the supreme leader to actually build the weapon. Now, once they make that decision, that could happen pretty quickly. But again, what she's talking about, how they're on the same page, is really unclear, unless it's a vague statement that, in fact, Iran could have a nuclear weapon if they decided to pretty quickly. It would just be a matter of enriching the uranium to a higher level, Garrett.
All right. So among the armchair experts on Iran right now, we've all been learning and discussing a lot about Fordow, the nuclear enrichment facility there. You are an actual expert on it. And so I pose to you this question. What kind of weaponry would it take to go after this underground, under a mountain site? Is this really the kind of thing that only the United States can do?
At this point, yes. Okay, so the reason is the actual facility, sort of the hallways where the actual facility lives, is about 300 feet underground, maybe a little, give or take a little bit, but roughly 300 feet underground. And it's underneath deep concrete. So there's really only a very small number of weapons that could actually penetrate that. One, we're starting to hear more about it this week. It's called a GBU-57. It's a 30,000-pound bomb. And frankly, even with that, it would probably take multiple bombs to actually really break through that concrete and get down to the actual facility. Now, keep in mind, it's not like it's just one building. It is a large complex. Sure. It's surrounded by a military facility as well. So at this point, it's as far as we know, the United States is the only one who has this bomb, and the United States is the only one who has an aircraft capable of carrying it and deploying it. I say as far as we know because the reality is here, we know what has been released publicly, we know what has been reported, but there are always things that we just don't know, Garrett. At this point, we believe the U.S. is the only one to have that capability, though. Now,
as a former Kansas City, Missouri resident, I'm legally compelled to ask you, is that the kind of thing that has to be flown from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri on a B-2? Or what do we have in the region right now in terms of weaponry? What can be done with the assets that already exist in the Middle East?
It would be flown from a B-2, and by the way, they don't just keep those 30,000-pound bombs sitting anywhere. They would have to move them into the region as well.
Right. Okay.
Of course, they're not going to telegraph when they do that. But look, I mean, Garrett, these are things that if the decision is made, it could happen quickly. At this point, we don't believe the decision has been made. We have no indication that that is the case. But yes, they would have to use B-2s. The U.S. has other bombers that are actually already still in the region. They have them at Diego Garcia, but the B-2s are still, as far as we know, are still here back in the United States.
Nobody has an air tag on those bad boys. Courtney, thank you for your reporting on this. I know you'll stay on top of it. I want to bring in Aaron David Miller now. He's a former advisor on Arab-Israeli negotiations and a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron, I'm so glad you're with us. I want to start with the domestic politics of this all, and then we'll get back into the international part of it. President Trump mostly ran on this idea of a more isolationist, no new wars in the Middle East specifically stance. What do you make of the divide that seems to be coming into place within the Republican Party about whether to keep in that isolationist lane or to take a more hawkish stance? And what is your read on which direction the administration is leaning at this hour?
Look, there may be dissenters in MAGA world who have strong voices. The reality is, what are they going to do if Donald Trump decides that negotiations have run out of runway? The Israelis cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program. What are they going to do? Desert him? No. The reality is that it seems to me that Donald Trump is dominating American politics. This is the 10th year of that, frankly, since the 30-second elevator ride. In 2015, Peter Baker has a phenomenal piece in the New York Times this morning. He sits astride Republican Democratic politics. He also has the Constitution on his side. And the reality is that the presidency is the Energizer Bunny of the political system. He's going to act. There'll be no congressional restraints. I'm assuming the operation that is planned succeeds, and this is a complicated question, I think. I don't think that there's serious constraints and concerns from inside the Republican Party that will shape his thinking.
No, I think what shapes his thinking is his conception of himself, right? I mean, this is somebody who considers himself the consummate deal maker. Can you make a deal with Iran while you're dropping 30,000-pound bombs on them?
Well, I think once the decision is made to use those GBU-57s with B-2 Spirit bombers and the Iranian reaction to that, I'm hard-pressed to believe, even if the theory of the case is, I'm going to do what the Israelis cannot do. It won't be a massive, comprehensive campaign. We don't need that. I'm simply going to demonstrate to the Iranians and the Israelis that we have essentially capped off Israel's effort. Now, he'll turn to Mr. Netanyahu and say, look, you've done about as much as you can do. I've supplemented it. It's now time to stop. Then he'll turn to the Iranians. And if this is their expectation, the administration's, I think it may not be terribly well thought through. The Iranians are going to respond.
Right.
Despite the asymmetry of power, they have thousands of short-range ballistic missiles. Geography is destiny here. The Gulf, the Saudis, American forces in Iraq and Syria. And yes, the United States military could mount a campaign of shock and awe that could go on for weeks.
Aaron, can I jump in here?
I'm sorry, just one more point. You want to end Iran's nuclear program, you're going to have to basically change the regime, occupy the country, so that there is absolutely no way that any Iranian establishment will be able to continue this. If you don't do that, it seems to me the Iranians are going to reconstitute their program. So the question is, how far along have they thought this through?
You've led me to three buzzwords. You said, it won't be a big operation, shock and awe, regime change. My millennial Iraq war brain immediately goes there. What is the risk inherent in this going to where some of Netanyahu's comments seem to suggest he wants it to, which is an end to this Iranian regime? And I recognize this is impossible, but we are short on time. So give me your most concise answer.
You can do regime change in the Middle East three ways. You can mount millions of people in the streets, Egypt, Tunisia, and military won't fire on the crowd, so the authoritarians have to leave office. Power. You can do what Syria did, HTS, a coherent, cohesive force backed by the Turks, a hollow Assad regime. Within 3 weeks, there are no more Assads. Or you can do Iraq and Afghanistan. You can get rid of Saddam and the Taliban, right, by occupying the country. Good luck with that, given the results. So I think regime change is an illusion. They can break and weaken the regime. They can't piece another Humpty Dumpty together again that is capable of governing in a way that would be amenable both to Israel and the United States. So this seems to me, got to be thought through. And the costs of not thinking it through could be prohibitive.
The region abounds with examples of poorly thought through efforts at regime change. Aaron David Miller, we have to leave it there. Thank you for bringing us your expertise.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.